Hello, rights advocates. I'm Attorney Paula Villarin from the Ateneo Human Rights Center, and this is Rights in Focus, Human Rights for Campus Journalists. Red tagging remains one of the significant challenges faced by journalists in the Philippines. This material aims to give a working definition of red tagging, provide a snapshot of the current landscape, and present some available legal remedies. Red tagging is not new in the Philippines. In 2007, former UN Special Rapporteur Philip Alston described red tagging as involving the vilification, labeling, and guilt by association that cast democratic organizations as communist groups and made them vulnerable to attack. The Philippine law still does not provide a formal statutory definition of red tagging, but there are working definitions used in the legal and advocacy discussions. Senior Associate Justice Marvic Leonen's dissent in Zarate versus Aquino described red tagging as the labeling, branding, naming, or accusing of persons or organizations as left-leaning, subversive, communist, or terrorist, often as part of a strategy used against perceived enemies of the state. At this point, let's bring it now to the current day legal and political context. At the latter part of 2017, then-President Duterte declared an all-out war against terror. In 2018, the Department of Justice sought to have 600 individuals and groups, including the CPP-NPA, declared a terrorist under the Human Security Act of 2007. Thereafter, Executive Order No. 70 institutionalized the whole-of-nation approach and created the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict, otherwise known as the NTF-ELCA. This executive order formalized a wider state role in anti-insurgency efforts, including the integration of military and civilian agencies and the use of barangay-level development programs tied to communist-cleared areas. The legal framework also shifted. Later, the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020 replaced the Human Security Act and transferred the power of designation from the judiciary to the executive through the Anti-Terrorism Council. Why does this matter? Once a person or organization is publicly associated with terrorism, the legal consequences can escalate quickly, including arrest, prolonged detention, designation, and restriction on activities. What made it especially dangerous was the broader security environment in which labeling could be followed by surveillance, arrest, detention, prosecution, or even asset freezing. Red tagging was amplified through official statements, state-linked channels, and online propaganda networks that pushed narratives portraying activists and critics as terrorists or communist fronts. In 2024, AHRC had a project called the Red Tagging Monitoring Tool, where we monitored online and offline incidents of red tagging using these working definitions as our standard. In 2024, we recorded about 615 incidents of red tagging, including both online and offline reports. In 2025, we recorded 1,245 incidents, 35 of which were offline. While these figures are not meant to represent the entire situation in the Philippines, they do help us identify some patterns. In 2025, we saw spikes in incidents in May and June, which likely reflected the pressures of the midterm election period. Among incidents where the region could be identified, the major hotspots were the National Capital Region, Region 11, Davao, Region 5, Bicol, Region 3, Central Luzon, and Region 6, Western Visayas. So who were the common targets? Civil society, legislative and political work, and the youth. The incidents we monitor often take place on Facebook, but similar content also appears on other online platforms. These include public posts, graphics, and so-called anti-terror awareness materials that identify civilians or organizations and associate them with insurgency or terrorism. Red tagging is not simply a harsh criticism or a political disagreement. The problem is that a person or organization is publicly marked as a threat without sufficient evidence and without a fair chance to respond. Even before any arrest or prosecution happens, the act of labeling can already undermine freedom of expression, freedom of the press, freedom of association, due process, and the rights to life, liberty, and security as recognized by the Supreme Court in the case of De Duro versus Binoya. For campus journalists, here are some legal remedies that you can use. For warrantless arrests, there is Article 125 of the Revised Penal Code. It mandates that any public officer or employee who detains a person must deliver the detained individual to the proper judicial authorities within a specific period, and failure to do so constitutes a criminal offense. There are also constitutional remedies. The writ of amparo is a remedy that protects the right to life, liberty, or security, especially in cases of extralegal killings, enforced disappearances, or serious threats. The court may grant reliefs like temporary protection, inspection, production, and witness protection orders. We also have the writ of habeas data. It is a remedy that protects a person's privacy in relation to life, liberty, or security. When data or information about them is unlawfully gathered, stored, or used, such as in surveillance, profiling, watch lists, or unlawful data collection, connected to threats or harassment, the court may order the disclosure, correction, suppression, or destruction of the data involved. Lastly, we have the writ of habeas corpus, which is a remedy against illegal detention or confinement. It is used when a person is unlawfully arrested, detained, or kept in custody, and it requires the custodian to bring the person before the court and justify the detention. If the detention is unlawful, the court may order the person's release. These legal remedies are often reactive and usually come into play when the harm has already happened. While these legal remedies exist, it is still better for the Philippines to establish a legal framework expressly protecting human rights defenders from red tagging. This would ensure greater accountability from the government.